Welcome back, everyone. My name is Connor Vogelsong, and I first got involved with YAF when I served as the chairman of My Young Americans for Freedom chapter at Penn State Harrisburg. Today, thank you. Today, I serve as the program officer for YAF's Center for Entrepreneurship and Free Enterprise, and it is my honor to introduce our next speaker, economist Dr. Arthur Laffer. Dr. Laffer is the founder and chairman of Laffer Associates, an economic research and consulting firm based in Nashville, Tennessee. His economic insights and influence in leading a worldwide tax-cutting movement in the 1980s have earned him the distinction in many publications as the father of supply-side economics. Dr. Laffer was a member of President Ronald Reagan's Economic Policy Advisory Board for both his 2 terms in the White House. He was rightfully awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Donald Trump in 2019, and he currently serves as the Board of Advisors of YAF's Center for Entrepreneurship and Free Enterprise. There is no better friend and partner to YAF than Dr. Laffer. Over the years, he has spoken to thousands of YAFers at nearly 50 campus events and conferences nationwide. And it is our privilege to host him today. Dr. Laffer's visit today is possible by the legacy of Thomas and Marjorie Mars, in whose honor YAF organizes annual lectures. Their son, Bob Mars, is with us today, so thank you for your support in helping to educate the next generation of free market principles. Pay close attention to the most influential economist of our time, as you can now work with YAF to host Dr. Laffer on your college campus to dismantle the false arguments being promoted by your professors and fellow students. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Arthur Laffer.
You can tell how tall Connor is, can't you? Excuse me for lowering this down. In my life, by the way, I've almost always had to lower the microphone from some giant person introducing me. But thank you, Connor. Except in 2 cases. Milton Friedman and Bob Reich, both of whom are about 4'7", something like that. In those cases, whenever I followed them on the podium, I was able to raise the microphone. The difference between Bob Reich and Milton Friedman is that, in all honesty, I actually looked up to Milton Friedman. Thank you. Hey, seriously, having you guys here is very deadly serious stuff. I'm going to have a little fun with you today, if that's okay. All right? But I do want to say the serious things first. YAF has been an enormously important vehicle for training the next generation here. As the president said, Ronald Reagan said, you know, each society is 1 generation away from tyranny. And if you guys aren't educated by the proper facilities, et cetera, the U.S. really could fail. So I stand in honor of just being a part of YAF and what they're doing with you guys. Thank you very much for all you do. It's just really wonderful. Thank you. I knew Bill Buckley really well. He started YAF, then Ronald Reagan. I knew him really well, worked with them. And you couldn't have a better legacy than you have right now and what is on. But now, in spite of the seriousness, can I have a little fun with you? Okay, because I'm going to, coming over here today, I was wandering around a little bit. DC's sort of interesting and fun. There's some little old areas around, and I found this bookstore. This little bitty bookstore, the wooden door on it and the collector's items and stuff. And I'm a book freak. So I walked in, I opened up the bookstore, the door, and there was the proprietor of the store sitting behind his desk in there. And I saw him there, and he looked up at me, and I said, "Excuse me, but by any chance, do you have a copy of Donald Trump's latest book on how to get rid of illegal aliens?" He looked at me, put his glasses down like this, says, "Get the hell out of here and don't come back." And I said, "Yeah, that's the one. Do you have it in paperback?" Even though the mission is serious, you can have fun on that mission, and that's my motto in life. Let me start off on economics, and what I want to really do with you here on economics is just cover quickly sort of the 5 grand kingdoms of macroeconomics and sort of apply it to you. And I'm going to use the example of Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump and those 5 grand kingdoms. And just for the record, economics is all about incentives. That's all it is. People like doing some things, and they dislike doing other things. And the government can, through its policies, change the attractiveness of these activities. For example, on taxation, I mean, why do we tax speeders on the freeway? To get them to stop speeding. Why do we tax cigarette smokers? To get them to stop smoking. In the same breath, why do we tax people who earn income? Why do we tax people who employ other people? Why do we tax companies that make wonderful products at low cost and don't use favor grabbers and make lots and lots of profits? Why do we don't tax them to get them to stop earning income. We don't get them to tax them to have them stop employing other people. We don't tax those companies to stop making wonderful products at low cost that people love. We do it to raise revenues. But what I want to tell you is that don't for a moment think that those same negative incentives don't apply to income, to employment, and to profits just as much as they do to speeders and smokers. When you tax something, you get less of it. When you subsidize something, you get more of it. If you look at what this country does, and I could go through this with you, nonstop. If you look at what we are doing here is we're taxing people who work and we're paying people who don't work. Do I need to tell you further what the consequences of those activities are going to be? Obviously not. To create a prosperous society, you really need to make it efficient and understand and work with incentives. On taxation, for example, now I'm going to go through the 5 kingdoms of macroeconomics with you. Number 1 is taxation. Number 2 is government spending. Number 3 is monetary policy. Number 4 is regulatory policy. And the last one, which you've heard a lot about lately, is trade policy, international. And let me just go through them. I'm just going to touch on them quickly just to sort of outline. What I do is I look at each of these 5 kingdoms, which are the 5 kingdoms of macroeconomics. They do consist of the whole topic there. And they are all incentive-based 100%. If you look at taxes, if you look at taxes, what is the sort of North Star of taxes? The way I look at each of these grand kingdoms and look at legislation in the context of these grand kingdoms is I look at it and I ask myself, what's the North Star? And then does this legislation move us towards the North Star or away from the North Star? When you think about taxation, the North Star is you want to have the lowest possible tax rate on the broadest possible tax base. So you provide people with the least incentives to evade, avoid, or otherwise not report taxable income. And you want to have the least exemptions, exclusions, credits, write-off, et cetera, the least exemptions there so that there are the least number of places where people can put their income to avoid paying taxes. A low-rate, broad-based, flat tax. All of you with me? That is the North Star of taxation. So when I look at taxes, I look at it simply in those terms, period. Let's take Ronald Reagan, for example. When Reagan came into office, the highest marginal income tax rate in the United States was 70%. Literally was 70. Think of that for a moment. In 1944, the highest marginal income tax rate in the United States was 94%. Every dollar you earned, the government said, thank you very much, you're allowed to keep 6 cents. When Reagan came into office, the highest tax rate was 70%. He cut that rate from 70% down to 28%. That's pretty phenomenal. That's the North Star. He took it from 14 tax brackets to 2 tax brackets. He cut the corporate tax from 46% to 34%. He cut the capital gains tax from almost 50% to 28%. This was amazing. Got rid of all sorts of deductions, exemptions, loopholes, et cetera. It was just unbelievable what he did during that period. Ronald Reagan knew how to fire towards that North Star and move it all the way. I mean, this was amazing for that. In this same today's administration, if you look at the BBB, the Big Beautiful Bill, Donald Trump reestablished the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And let me take you through what the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act did. It dropped the highest corporate tax rate from 21%, from 34% to 21%, which is pretty darn good. It dropped the highest marginal income tax rate from 39.6 to 37. It put in 100% expensing in there. The BBB put into permanency the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It added a little flavor to it, too. There was a reduction in taxes on tips, a reduction in taxes on overtime, and a reduction in taxes on interest on your car loans, which is all proper. But in the very same sense of the Reagan agenda of the North Star low-rate, broad-based flat tax, this administration is moving in the same direction, and the results so far have been extraordinarily good on taxes. All of you with me on that? That's the first grand kingdom. The second one is government spending. And you look at government spending, we all know we need government spending. You got to have highways, schools, blah, 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 and all that stuff. But what you want to make sure is that you don't go beyond the purpose of the system. And, you know, all taxes are bad, but some are worse than others. So what you want to do when you look at government spending is you want to make it so that when the last dollar of money spent, the benefits from the last dollar of money spent are bigger than the damage done by the last dollar of taxes collected, you stop already. That's the ideal level of government spending. When you look at it today, we are way, way, way overspending on this. In 1910, total government spending as a share of GDP was about 3% of GDP. Today, it's probably 43% of GDP. I think we may be gone a little too far. You know, when you look at government spending, again, you want spending restraint in the system. Low-rate, broad-based flat tax, and on the North Star for spending is spending restraint. If you look at the Big Beautiful Bill, there are lots of things in there that I don't like, but the bulk of the bill is really good. If you look at what DOGE was doing here, it was extremely good. You know, we all know we need bigger defense spending to make sure we're safe and secure. And under Ronald Reagan, they cut government spending that was not defense, increased government spending that was. And in the same breath, this administration under Trump is doing very much the same thing in the Big Beautiful Bill. I love that BBB, don't you? Can you just, I mean, if I could only dye my hair a little yellow and whirl it around a little bit, I could give the speech perfectly. Never mind. The low-rate, broad-based flat tax, spending restraint. There are, by the way, a couple of things in the BBB that are really worth school choice. There are funds in there for school choice. There are funds in there for medical price transparency, which is really big deals going on, as well as funding all the departments and agencies. Third grand kingdom is money. I mean, when you look at, there's nothing that can bring an economy to its knees sooner and worse than an unsound paper currency. I mean, literally, there's nothing that can. What you want to have is sound money. You want to know that the value of a dollar bill 10, 5, 15, 20 years from now will be worth the exact same as it is today, so we can all contract with each other with bonds, et cetera, and know what the numeraire is going to be. You know, prior to 1913, the United States did not have a government money at all. Now, the government defined what a dollar bill was. It was 1/20th of an ounce of gold. It was also 1 ounce of silver. But from 1790 until 1913, the monetary system of the United States was private. All of them were banknotes. Now, the government did audit the balance sheets of banks to make sure that they were reporting their numbers correctly. There was minting of coins. All of that went on. But the government did not control money. It was private. From 1790 until 1913, the average rate of inflation in the United States was 0%. I mean, literally for 123 years, we had no inflation whatsoever. We had bops up and down, but there was no systematic inflation. In 1913, we put in the Federal Reserve Board. 1933, Roosevelt devalued the dollar against gold by going from $20.67 an ounce to $35 an ounce. We then had controls, et cetera, to the position here. Under Biden, we had inflation of a little over 20%. If you look at under Reagan, Reagan brought in Paul Volcker to again try to establish price stability. The rate of inflation, the day Reagan took office on January 20th, 1981, the prime interest rate in this wonderful country of ours was 21.5%. 21. Inflation was rampant, double digit. He brought that way, way down during his period. If you look at Donald Trump again, Donald Trump had no inflation and very low inflation in his first term. In this term, you see that the inflation's low. He is going to replace the Federal Reserve Chairman with someone I think is going to be very, very good. It's going to be super. And you see there's another great similarity between Ronald Reagan's economics and Donald Trump's situation. By the way, your professors, by the way, don't get this. Just for the record, I don't know if any of you take economics classes ever. If you do, you'll notice that the economics professors all have round shoulders and flat foreheads. Did you ever notice that? And you ask yourself, why do they have round shoulders and flat foreheads? Well, you ask them a question and they go, you tell them the answer and they go, come on. In my day, we said that if you got a PhD, it meant piled higher and deeper, just for the record. You're going to see policy. You want stable currencies. And that is the way I think we're going to go. Under Reagan, we brought down the rate of inflation dramatically, stabilized the dollar in the international exchanges. And under Trump, you've seen the same process going, a great deal of similarity. Low rate, broad-based flat tax, spending restraints, sound money. The fourth grand kingdom is regulations. And you can see this. Everyone knows we need regulations. Everyone understands that. You can't wake up one morning and decide to drive on the left-hand side of the road and then the next morning wake up and drive on the right-hand side of the road. You need regulations, but what you want to make sure is that these regulations don't go beyond the specific purposes at hand and create a lot of collateral damage in the system. Now, when Reagan came in as president, the first thing he did was deregulate energy. At that time, the price of a barrel of oil in those dollars was $32 a barrel. By the time his regulations had taken full effect after 5 years, the price of a barrel of oil had dropped from $32 a barrel to $8 a barrel. How's that for cool? Just go ahead. Yeah, this was Reagan. Come on. He got rid of wellhead price controls. He got rid of the excess profits tax on energy companies. He got rid of all the gas lines. And we used to have gas lines in the U.S. because Jimmy Carter would not allow gas stations to raise the price of gas. So they had to ration it. So you had these long lines at gas stations. Herb Stein, who was back then, was able to prove mathematically that the length of a gas line could never exceed the length it could never exceed the time it took to drive through with one full tank of gas. That was the limit. Never mind. You had to just drive through, get your gas, and start again. Never mind. It's a good joke, by the way. Just first thing Donald Trump does come in, decontrol of energy. If you notice in his first term, we were energy independent. It's the exact same thing. If you look at some of the other things on deregulation of this administration, you can see on healthcare price transparency. Since 1970, U.S. life expectancy relative to the OECD has been dropping dramatically, just going straight down. The cost compared to the OECD of healthcare has been rising dramatically. It's what I call le croix de santé, the cross of health. It's working in the wrong direction. The reason is we do not have markets in healthcare. It's 18% of GDP, but no one knows what the cost of it is. In a good market-driven world, very few of you would need insurance except for catastrophic insurance. Literally. We need to get back to a market system there. That's the type of reform, deregulation that's truly needed in the U.S., is to get back to healthcare. You have low-rate broad-based flat tax, spending restraint, sound money, minimal regulations, and and minimal regulations, and lastly, free trade. There is nothing more essential to prosperity than free trade, literally. And if you look at the U.S. historically, we have built our prosperity in this country with free trade deficits. We imported capital from abroad. We used that to combine it with our labor and our natural resources. And we built the most productive country on planet Earth because of international trade, period. There are some things we make better than foreigners, and there are some things foreigners make better than we do. We and they would be foolish in the extreme if we didn't sell them those products we're more efficient at producing than they are, and we import those products they're more efficient than we are. It's a win-win-win-win. It's called the Ricardian gains from trade. It is the essential. Under Ronald Reagan, we had something called NAFTA, which is a North American Free Trade Agreement, which was a huge move in the free trade direction. If you look at Reagan on the 5 pillars of prosperity, taxes, phenomenal. Government spending, phenomenal. Monetary policy, greater than phenomenal. Deregulation, great. And free trade. In all 5 of those kingdoms, Ronald Reagan was able to move us to the North Star. Very similar to what's going on with Donald Trump today. If you look at his trade, and I'm going to just describe to you what I think his philosophy is, what his motives are today, is that when you look at the world today, the U.S. is, of the large countries at least, the freest trade country in the world, by far. We're much freer trade than other large countries in the world. They have been able to put on all sorts of tariffs on the U.S., non-tariff barriers, et cetera. We've allowed them to do that with perfect clarity. I mean, after World War II, we allowed all these other countries to use protective legislation to protect their domestic industries, to be able to build them up and to bring them up. They're now all big, and yet they all still have those protectionist tariffs there. The U.S. is by far the freest trade big country in the world, number one. Number two, those tariffs are no longer needed by these countries to protect their things. What I think the president is doing in negotiating these trade agreements is, I think the only reason they are worried about the U.S. is because they want access to U.S. markets. By threatening them with tariffs, 50, 100, 200%, it brings those countries to the table, and they will negotiate freer trade agreements with the U.S. If you look at what Donald Trump did in his first term, there were 5 trade agreements he did. One was the USMCA, and the USMCA, by the way, moved us all in a freer trade direction. Okay, it was moving towards that North Star. We had the USMCA, we had the deal with Japan, which moved us towards that North Star. We had one with South Korea, we had one with Brazil, and we had a free trade agreement with Colombia as well. There was one G7 meeting where Donald Trump was at in the first term, and it was held in Ottawa, and he had to leave the meeting a little early. He had to go to Singapore to meet with Kim Jong-un. I don't know if any of you know this story, but he was negotiating with Kim Jong-un to not use nuclear weapons and to cool his, that's when Kim Jong-un had a button, he had a nuclear button. And that's when Donald Trump said, "So do I, and mine is bigger than yours." Typical Trump. I mean, is it not? Great. If you look at the situation there, he was leaving, and he had to leave early, and he looked at the 6 other members of the G7 sitting there at the meeting and said, "Excuse me, guys, I've got to leave. Forgive me. I don't think you want nuclear war. You want me to go meet with Kim Jong-un, but I've got one deal to make with you before I leave. The United States today is prepared to get rid of all tariffs, all quotas, and all non-tariff barriers if you are." And there was dead silence. They all, "Bye, Donald. See you later." This is the way I think he's doing it with free trade. He is moving in the direction of trying to get freer and freer trade for the U.S. and for the rest of the world. When I look at the 5 grand kingdoms of macroeconomics, taxes, spending, monetary policy, regulatory policy, and free trade, Each of the presidents, Reagan and Trump, are moving in the right directions there. This is from the standpoint of the economics, is the absolute secret sauce for creating prosperity. And that's where I'm going to leave it on the macroeconomics, but I am going to lead you with one additional story and then open them for questions. Have any of you ever been to Alaska? Any of you have? You have? Have you ever been up there in the wintertime?
Winter?
Yeah.
No, just in the summer.
Just in the summer? Well, they have something in the winter called the Iditarod race. Have any of you heard about that, the dog sled race across Alaska?
Yep.
You know, it's sort of interesting. I met this guy, and he told me that he had been up in Alaska and involved with this, and he was in this little town in outback Alaska, dirt road, wooden buildings and all that sort of stuff, and he went to this little town, and there was a bar in that town, and he noticed, the bar had those swinging doors, and he walked into the bar, and there he saw on the bar was a little sign that read, "Tough guys drink free." Well, he called the bartender over and said, "Excuse me, I noticed your sign here, tough guys drink free. Would you mind telling me what you consider a tough guy to be?" The bartender said, "Stop right there. You tell me your story, and then I'll tell you whether you're a tough guy or not. You with me?" The guy says, okay, fine. That's the rules. I'll do it. He said, "I was on the Iditarod race. I was up there, and I had my dog sled, and all of us were lined up, and the starting bell went off, and all the sleds took off, and mine took off fastest. I was way ahead of the pack after about 20 minutes. I came up over this ridge, and there was this enormous Kodiak bear. This Kodiak bear killed my lead dog. It came down. It ripped my right arm off my body. My right arm fell in a snowbank. I reached in my backpack. I pulled out my Swiss Army knife because I didn't have a right arm anymore. It was in some snowbank somewhere. I had to open it up with my teeth. I opened up my Swiss Army knife. I fought that Kodiak bear for about half an hour. I finally killed the Kodiak bear. I then reached back in my backpack. I got an extra shoelace that I've been carrying with me. I had my Swiss Army knife, a shoelace, and I hunted in the snow for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Finally, I found my right arm. I put my right arm in the snowbank. All right, I leaned against it. With the Swiss Army knife, I sewed my right arm back onto my body with the shoelace, put it back on, shut the Swiss Army knife on my chest, flipped it in the backpack, got back on my dog sled, sans lead dog, without the lead dog, and I finished the race and came in 3.5 hours behind the leader. And that's my story. The bartender looked at him and said, "Mister, that's the most amazing story I've ever heard in my life. You are a tough guy, and you drink free." And the guy goes, "All right!" I'm going to lead you with an upbeat note. When you look at this economy and look to the future of the world you have in front of you, all right! And with that, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for supporting YAF. I love you guys more than anything. And I'm going to throw it open for questions if there are any questions.
All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started with Q&A.
I don't know what time. How am I doing on time? Have I gone way over time?
You're all good.
Good. Let's go. Someone just tell me to stop when I'm supposed to stop. I can't see my watch.
15 minutes. We're all good.
Good. Great. Let's go for it.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for coming.
My
My name
pleasure.
is Ben. I'm from MSU Denver. And I took 2 economics classes this last semester. I took a macroeconomics and then I took a microeconomics as well. And nobody had anything good to say about trades, particularly about tariffs. Particularly about how tariffs won't lead to growth. One of the things you mentioned was free trade. So I would like to know how tariffs are going to lead us to free trade, and what do you see as valuable that I can bring up to people when they start bashing tariffs?
Yeah, well, I think in case of tariffs, now let me just say free trade is always with a quotation mark around it. I do not believe we should sell nuclear weapons to Kim Jong-un. Okay, let's just start right there. There are some boundaries on that. when you look at trade, there are two benefits that come from trade. The one I mentioned too, which is the carbon gain. We make some things better than they do, and they make some things better than we do. That's a really important gain. The other important gain is that is what's called the Alexander gains from trade, which is the transfer of resources from one country to another. I mentioned that to you as well. Europe gave us a lot of trade. We had trade deficits with Europe from 1640 until 1870. We ran trade deficits every single year except for 7 years out of that 230 years. They supplied us with the capital to be able to huge, important gains from trade. And what you really need to do is understand that our tariffs are bad for us as well as foreigners, and foreign tariffs are bad for us as well as foreigners. No matter who puts those tariffs, how do you get foreigners to come to the table? That's the issue. Now, when you look at these foreigners who look at the U.S., all they care about is the U.S. market. And this literally. So how do you bring them to the table? What Donald Trump has done, I think, is negotiation by threatening tariffs on them to bring them to the table to negotiate trade agreements. As you can see, he's now accomplished a number of trade agreements. It's not over yet. Believe me, it's going to go on and on and on. My view is that Donald Trump understands this issue better than anyone in politics. I personally have talked to him about it a number of times, going through just what I talk about with you guys here today, literally, on that. He's also very capable. He's an international businessman. I don't know of any company, business person who is international who doesn't love free trade. I don't. And also, in one of my conversations with him, I probably shouldn't have done this. And just don't tell anyone, please. But I said, of course you're a free trader, Mr. President. I mean, you imported 2 foreign wives. He didn't laugh, by the way. I get just joking. No, I think what you do is, how do you get to freer trade? It's not going to happen voluntarily. Now, John F. Kennedy did it, Ronald Reagan did it, and Donald Trump, I think, is going to do it too, by negotiating with them, by threatening them with more protectionism and getting them to lower the barrier. Already, if you look at the Japanese deal, a lot of the non-tariff barriers have been removed. I think he's going to continue this process. Do not for a moment think that the banging and clumping and clinking, all of this going on, is ever going to stop. The smoke is never going to clear. The dust is never going to settle. This is like coming down a mountain in a Conestoga wagon without a driver, and where it's over a rocky thing and you're sitting there just banged around. You're going to be under constant negotiation. But when the dust does clear, when the end of the day comes, I think you're going to see much freer trade with the U.S., with the rest of the world, and working in cooperation. I also love the way he uses trade as a leverage with regard to places like Russia or China or Yemen or North Korea. I mean, it's Ronald Reagan's peace through strength. And I can remember, can I tell one story of Reagan in that? I was with him at the Beverly Hills Hotel. This was in 1979, before he was president. It was late in 79. There were about 11 or 12 of us at sort of a little thing. There was a visitor who came over from Israel at the time, and we were all sitting there, and Dick Allen was Trump's military security advisor. And so we were all sitting there. Jack Kemp was there and a bunch of others. And the governor said, you know, Dick, would you mind sort of giving a history of the U.S. policies in the post-World War II era? And just to start the conversation off, and Dick had this great sense of humor. He said, yes, sir, I'll be more than happy to. We've been doing basically 2 things throughout the post-World War II era. We've been harassing our friends, and we've been cajoling our enemies. And Governor, we all were hitting the floor laughing, and the governor said, excuse me, Dick, what did you say? He said, sir, we've been cajoling our enemies and harassing our friends. And the governor leaned over and turned his head and, well, Dick, you know, tell me, what's been the consequences of those policies? Well, you see, sir, we have almost no friends, left, but we have lots and lots of enemies, sir. And with that, he said, I think we're just going to have to reverse these policies now, aren't we? We're going to have to scare the bejabbers out of our enemies with Star Wars, and make our friends stinking rich with supply-side economics. I'm using a modern-day language on it. It was at that moment, that's peace through strength. You know, what you do is you threaten look, we can out-defense spend you. You dare not start a war. But if you choose the path of peace, we've got our markets open to you. Come on in and join us, and let's get rich together as friends. Your choice. Military, or do you want to make money together? You know, and that is the peace through strength model that Ronald Reagan was able to do. No wars during the 8 years of Reagan, believe me when I tell you. We had the big agreements with the Soviet Union and all that because of peace through strength. I think that is exactly what Donald Trump is doing today. And I think what you're going to see is a very successful outcome of all of that in Europe, in Asia, I think with China, and all over the world. So that's the way I would argue trade, free trade, et cetera. It's a great leverage point for the president to use, and I think he uses it exquisitely. Thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Laffer.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Paul Lunga. I'm from Ontario, Canada. I go to Spectrum Airways. I have a question for you. I'll keep it quick so the interns don't get mad at me. Much of Western tradition viewed usury with suspicion, believing it could lead to a form of bondage. If liberty includes economic independence, how do we square that with a monetary system where nearly every dollar in circulation exists because someone owes it back to a bank with interest? Would you support reforms to reduce our systemic dependence on private credit creation?
You know, usury is a funny word. It's a word used by borrowers who don't want to pay it back. And by lenders, they don't call it usurious. There are usury laws, and there are situations where we do need them. But basically what you want is market prices to clear. And you know, in certain circumstances, market prices require them to be very, very high to be able to allocate resources correctly. What I would like to see us do in monetary policy is I would like to see us do what Volcker did, was to set a price level stability that you want. Whenever prices start rising, the Fed should be selling bonds in the open market and taking money out of the system to stop that rise. When prices are falling too rapidly, they should be buying bonds and increasing the monetary base to stabilize. That is the proper role of the Fed, to stabilize prices over long periods of time. It's exactly the same policy that the Bank of England followed in stabilizing the gold price of the pound, and what we did in the U.S. from 1790 until 1913, which is the period I went over with you just briefly in measuring there. But that's what we really need to do, is just make sure that we have a unit of account that stays stable in value, and let other people worry about whose risk is how much, and that should be done in the free market, myself, I believe, totally. Does that answer your question? I hope it does.
A little bit. It's that my question here also includes whether or not money is created mostly through printing, through the Federal Reserve, or through banks by issuing these loans.
Well, and it's also created, I mean, very seriously, why do you think gold prices have risen so rapidly lately? Have you ever heard of Bitcoin? Any of you ever heard of Bitcoin? Heard about these? I don't know if you've seen that price go up there. Why are these prices responding that way? And the reason, very simply in my view, is that these are private ways of getting around government money. And they're trying to circumvent the monetary system to create a private monetary system to get around unbridled, unbacked paper currencies that are being put out by governments. If the government can't stabilize the value of the dollar, these people will seek alternative sources of monetary systems, in my view.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
This is going to be our last question.
Hi, Doctor. Ethan Johnson from the University of Texas at El Paso. My question is, did the Trump tax cuts prove that the Laffer curve works, or did the cuts fall short? And how does one find the right balance in taxation for the most revenue?
Yeah, let me just tell you, with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, I'm just going to hit the key elements there. What it did was it cut the personal income tax rate from 39.6 to 37, cut the corporate rate from 34% to 21%, put in 100% expensing of capital purchases, and to me, I'm 85 years old, it really reduced the inheritance tax, the death tax. Now, there were a lot of other provisions in there that I could go through with you, but those were the key elements there. If you look at what happened, now remember, it started in the fourth quarter of 2017. All right? If you look at the 2 years from the fourth quarter of 2017 through the third quarter of 2019, that's a 2-year period, 8 quarters, okay? If you look at it, U.S. real GDP growth had been paralleling the Eurozone for the 2 years prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Once the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act took effect, every quarter the U.S. growth rate exceeded that of the Eurozone. At the end of 2 years, U.S. real GDP was 2.5% higher than it would have been had we grown at the Eurozone growth rate. Huge plus in GDP, number one. Number two, if you look at poverty, unemployment in the U.S., all right, if you look at especially poverty and unemployment amongst small minority groups, teenagers, less educated, black, Hispanic, all-time lows on unemployment rates and on poverty rates in the U.S. Literally, throughout that 2-year period following the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act coming in the fourth quarter, those poverty rates, those unemployment rates fell to all-time lows in each and every one of those categories. But now the third one, which was the one I enjoy, the Laffer curve. All right? If you look at tax revenues, if you look at total federal tax revenues, total, in the 2 years from the fourth quarter of 2017 through the third quarter of 2019, if you look at those 8 quarters, that 2-year period, total federal tax revenues were substantially higher than the prior 2-year period. And in fact, their increase was greater than the prior 2-year period was with the 2 years prior to that. If you look at federal, state, and local tax revenues together, these tax cuts literally paid for themselves in the first 2 years of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, period. All of these forecasts that it was going to be $1.3 trillion, just all hooey. It's just literally. I just finished my book on Taxes Have Consequences with Dr. Brian Dimitrovic and Dr. Gene Sinkfield, which is a complete history of the U.S. income tax. Complete. We have every single tax return from 1913 to the present. We know what happened. And, I'm just going to put it to you this way. I could give a damn what your opinion is. And you should give a damn what my opinion is. This is about facts, not how you feel. And the facts are that Tax Cuts and Jobs Act paid for itself in its first 2 years, period. Not bad. Second thing is, when you look at the U.S. income tax, what we looked at specifically was what happens when you raise taxes, what happens when you raise taxes on the top 1% of income earners. We have all sorts of evidence on that throughout the whole period of the U.S. income tax with every tax return. Let me tell you what happens. Whenever we raise the highest marginal income tax rate on the top 1% of income earners, 3 things happened. Number 1, the economy underperformed. Number 2, tax revenues from the rich went down, not up. And number 3, the poor were hammered. Whenever we lowered tax rates on the top 1% of income earners, these are data, people, facts. Whenever we lowered tax rates on the top 1% of income earners, the economy has outperformed. Tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners have gone up, and the poor and the disadvantaged have been benefited, period. These are the facts. And so when you look at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we know what happened. We know what happens. All of these people who tell you, like Bernie, I wish Bernie Sanders were here today, by the way. Elizabeth Warren or AOC. I mean, it's just crazy what these people say. And it's absolutely counterfactual. Thanks for asking that question, by the way.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. Now, I was expecting one question. And I didn't get it. But I just want to know, I was expecting it, and you guys are all sort of young business, sort of free market pro people, and I'm just an old professor, so I decided to show you all my skills. And so what I decided to do before I came here is I looked at the New York Stock Exchange, all the NASDAQ, all of the stock markets there, and I looked at it and I applied supply-side economic principles to all the individual stocks. And I did this research over the last couple of months. And, you know, thought someone was going to ask me about what my stock picks were. So I did all of this research in anticipation of someone asking me. And what I found is that there are 8 stocks that I can guarantee you will triple in value in the next 6 weeks. Guarantee. But no one asked.
Thank you.